Previously on the high-velocity, low-altitude adventures of Flubber Lane, we witnessed a stocky kid from the crimson-choked basement of New Orizaba trade his old-world maple skateboard for a cramped berth on a starship that smelled like ozone and desperation. After being sentenced to the Colonial Military Academy by a corrupt judge who couldn't tell a digital docket from a grocery list, Lane found himself aboard the Heavy Freight Hauler Bellows. When pirates struck with jagged boarding spikes and searing photon bursts, our hero did the unthinkable. He skitched a live, ticking Mark-7 torpedo through the absolute vacuum of space, riding it like a wild stallion into the heart of the enemy's fuel port. The resulting explosion was a masterpiece of accidental heroism, vaporizing the pirate threat and turning Flubber Lane into a name whispered in awe by some and in total confusion by others. Now, the radiation has cleared, the adrenaline has faded, and for Flubber Lane, the true nightmare of military life has begun. The absolute, crushing weight of the logistical backlog and the relentless bureaucracy of a ship that is falling apart at the subatomic seams. The red iron dust of New Orizaba was a stubborn ghost that clung to the seams of Flubber Lane's service coveralls, a gritty reminder that no matter how high he climbed into the spires of the military elite, he was still just a kid from the basement who knew the taste of ozone and cheap, synth-leveled meat. Following the explosive decompression of the Bellows and his frantic ride on that live torpedo, the ship was a hollowed-out carcass of twisted alloy and flickering hard light interfaces. Lane didn't have time to celebrate his new status. He was too busy with a hydro wrench in one hand and a roll of prehistoric copper wiring in the other. He had been summoned to the shattered bridge, not for a reprimand, but for a ceremony that felt more like a funeral for his free time. The commanding officer, whose face now looked like a topographical map of a planet that had been hit by a relentless, multi-generational meteor shower, stood stiffly amidst the sparking debris of what used to be a command console. He pinned a heavy, gleaming star of valor to Lane's chest, a medal made of solid, high-density iridium that felt like it weighed 40 pounds and pulled his posture into a permanent slouch. Along with the medal came a datapad flickering with his promotion, head of maintenance and supply. The CO barked that Lane was now the unifying force of the ship's systems, a title that sounded suspiciously like, the only person we trust not to blow us up while we sleep. Lane looked at the datapad and realized his nightmare had just begun. The promotion was a Trojan horse of bureaucracy. It came with a backlog of 30 critical projects, ranging from stabilizing the subatomic gravity drives to recalibrating the synthetic meat synthesizers which were currently stuck on burnt rubber and wet dog flavor. Okay, can you bitch at me now? Lane muttered to Celine as she hovered over him like a nervous hummingbird, complaining that the life support nanites in the upper ward were vibrating at a frequency that made her high-born hair frizz. He was currently shoulder-deep in a junction box where an ultra-tech hard-light projector had melted into a conventional mechanical cooling fan. It was a mess of cross-tech nightmares. The ultra systems relied on thought mapping and ethereal power flows, while the conventional gear needed physical contact, actual juice, and the occasional kick. Lane was forced to strip the insulation from a high-tension cable and weave it into the light matrix using a pair of needle-nose pliers he'd found in a junk bin labeled pre-void relics. I didn't put that there, he grunted, pulling a calcified piece of ancient chewing gum out of the primary optical sensor. He bypassed the logic gate by wedging a copper penny, a literal relic from 1998, into the circuit breaker. Suddenly, the lights flickered from a sickly, nausea-inducing orange to a crisp, cool blue. The ship groaned, its systems coming back online in a stuttering, coughing fit of electronic rebirth. But as the long-range scanners finally shook off the radiation interference from the pirate explosion, a moderately moving ship appeared on the fringe of the sector. The bridge went cold, with the Bellows still trailing a plume of coolant and its stealth systems only at 12% capacity. Revealing themselves to a potential pirate scout was a death sentence. The struggle to identify the vessel was a war of static and frustration. The ultra-tech sensors were screaming about spectral anomalies and quantum shadows, while the conventional radar showed nothing but a gray, uncooperative smudge that looked like a thumbprint on the screen. Lane diverted power from the laundry room and the mess hall, ignoring the distant, muffled shouts of hungry sailors whose lunch had just been sacrificed to the god of electromagnetism, to boost the symptomatic transmitter power. He pushed the load so hard the wires behind the wall began to sing a high, vibrating note of protest that smelled like scorched plastic and lost hope. "I didn't put that there," Lane whispered as a small fire started in the corner of the console, which he promptly smothered with his new Iridium Star of Valor metal, the heavy metal acting as a perfect heat sink. Finally, the image resolved. It wasn't a pirate. It was a derelict transport, a drifting tomb that had been gutted long before by the same pirate faction they had recently engaged. The ship was a ghost, its systems failing in a slow, agonizing crawl through the void. It was caught in a stationary holding field, likely a remnant of a pirate's tractor beam that had never been deactivated. Lane knew they had to act. He organized a rescue party, including Celine and 2 conventional grunts who were better with sledgehammers than sensors. They launched in a cramped repair shuttle, but as they neared the derelict, a cloud of micro-debris, shattered glass and frozen fuel, swirled like a storm. The shuttle took a hit to its comms array. The 2 rescuers in the lead were suddenly cut off, their signals disappearing into a distorted wall of radiation and false readings that made it look like they were spinning into a black hole. Celine panicked as the last location of the rescue party showed them inside a solid wall of the derelict ship, a physical impossibility that challenged her understanding of orbital mechanics. "The radiation is bending the sensor return," Lane yelled over the roar of the shuttle's struggling engines. "They aren't inside the wall. They're stuck in the wreckage outside it." He watched the small communicator on his wrist flash a mocking, steady red. No contact. Lane realized that the survivors on the other side of the derelict's hull could see the rescue party through the viewports, but they weren't helping. In fact, they were frantically barricading the airlock with storage crates and fused metal. They thought the rescuers were pirates left behind to finish the job, and with the comms dead, there was no way to explain that the monsters outside were actually the maintenance crew coming to save them from a slow suffocation. Lane decided he couldn't wait for the tech to fix itself. He suited up and leapt into the debris field, his low center of gravity allowing him to skate off the floating plates of armor like they were quarter pipes in a zero-G skate park. He reached the trapped rescuers, who were pinned under a collapsed support beam that looked like a giant, twisted finger of an angry god. Okay, can you bitch at me now?" He hissed into his helmet as Celine's voice crackled with 1,000 reasons why his plan was scientifically unsound and likely to result in his immediate and messy vaporization. Lane reached the airlock where the survivors were pointing jury-rigged pulse rifles at the glass. He didn't have a weapon. He had a broken piece of structural pipe and a heavy, reinforced chair he dragged from the shuttle's cockpit. Using the raw, conventional education of the basement, he began a frantic bit of battlefield engineering. He took the chair apart, using the circular metal base as a makeshift pulley. He looped a length of hanging ceiling wire, thick, insulated rope, around the pipe and the pulley, creating a mechanical advantage that no ultra-tech computer would have bothered to calculate because it was too primitive. He started hauling the debris off the trapped rescuers, his muscles screaming under the strain as he pulled against the weight of the galaxy. The survivors watched through the reinforced glass, their fingers on the triggers, as this stocky human worked with the frantic energy of a man who didn't understand the word impossible and had apparently never read a safety manual. He looked at them through the glass and started gesturing wildly, using the phonetic hand signals he'd learned in the academy for emergency, friend. He wasn't attacking. He was clearing their only exit. "I didn't put that there," Lane yelled, though they couldn't hear him, as a secondary explosion in the derelict's hull sent a fresh wave of scrap metal toward him. He caught a flying plate with the pipe and wedged it into the bulkhead, creating a temporary shield for the survivors. The sheer absurdity of his labor, using a chair and a pipe to move tons of starship wreckage, finally broke the survivors' resolve. They lowered their weapons. They realized that no pirate would work this hard or look this ridiculous just to save someone. The airlock hissed open, and the rescue was completed in a frantic rush of pressurized air and sobbing relief. As they headed back to the Bellows, the survivors thanked Lane, calling him a hero once again. Lane just looked at his ruined coveralls and the grease under his fingernails. He realized that the promotion to head of maintenance meant he would never actually get to sleep again, as the derelict ship he'd just saved now had to be towed, adding another 40 projects to his already impossible list. He sat on a crate in the shuttle, looking at the iridium metal that he was now using to scrape a stubborn bit of pirate shrapnel out of his boot. The technical breakdown of the derelict was a masterpiece of disaster. Lane had to interface a 20th-century-style pneumatic valve system with a quantum fluid cooling loop. Every time he tightened a bolt, a holographic display 3 rooms away would start screaming in a language that hadn't been spoken for 500 years. He spent 3 hours trying to convince a sentient toaster in the officer's lounge that it didn't need to find itself, and should just brown the bread without making a political statement. Okay, can you bitch at me now? He groaned to the CO, who was demanding to know why the stealth systems were still only at 12%. Lane explained that the stealth emitters were being used to keep the Derelict's life support from imploding, a choice that made tactical sense but was a bureaucratic disaster. He was forced to rewire the entire starboard sensor array using nothing but discarded copper pipes and the magnetic strips from old credit cards he found in a locker. The sheer volume of "I didn't put that there" moments was staggering, from finding a nest of space rats in the gravity well to discovering that the previous engineers had been using a Mark III torpedo casing as a makeshift coffee table in the engine room. Lane's life was now a constant cycle of crisis and correction. He had to manage a team of ultra-tech scientists who were brilliant at theory but couldn't identify a flathead screwdriver if it fell from the ceiling and hit them in the face. He taught them the thump method, the ancient art of hitting a machine until it remembers its primary function. To his surprise, it worked. The Bellows started to hum with a new, rugged vitality. The ship wasn't elegant, and it certainly wasn't ultra anymore, but it was functional in a way it hadn't been since it left the shipyard. He spent his few minutes of rest staring at the infinite blackness, wondering if the judge back home was enjoying his yacht, or if the red dust of New Orizaba was still clogging the lungs of the kids who just wanted to skate. He knew he was the most important man in the fleet, not because he was a soldier, but because he was the only one who knew how to bridge the gap between the year 1998 and the year 4000 using nothing but grit and a wrench. He was a hero of the void, a master of maintenance, and the only man who could ride a bomb and fix a toaster in the same afternoon. But the galaxy wasn't finished with him. As the Derelict was finally secured and the Bellows prepared to jump to light speed, the long-range scanners picked up another signal, not a ship this time, but a rhythmic, haunting pulsing coming from a nearby asteroid field. It was a signal Lane recognized from his time in the basement, an old-world SOS coded into a frequency that the ultra-techs had long since forgotten in their pursuit of telepathic communication. It was a call for help from a ghost of the past, a legacy signal that suggested there was more than just wreckage in this sector. Lane knew that his backlog was about to get a lot longer, and his hope for a sandwich was getting a lot smaller. He grabbed his skateboard, now reinforced with iridium plates and magnetic trucks that could grip a hull even in a high-speed maneuver, and headed for the docking bay. The irony of his life settled in like the red dust. He was a legend, a leader, and a target, but at the end of the day, he was still just a boy with a board, looking for a clean line in a dirty, broken universe. Will Flubber Lane ever find the source of the mysterious signal, or is he being lured into another elaborate pirate trap designed to exploit his heroism? Can he manage to repair the derelict ship while the Bellows is being hunted by invisible enemies lurking in the shadows of the quantum field? And will he ever find a sandwich that doesn't require a level 5 security clearance and a manual override to eat? The technical debt is high, the stakes are higher, and the only man with the wrench is currently trying to figure out why the gravity in the showers is set to Jupiter, while the toilets are set to 0G. Don't forget to tune in next time for Episode 3, The Short Circuit of Destiny, where our hero learns that in space, even the shadows have a manual override and every shortcut leads to a very long day of repairs. It's bound to be another high-velocity collision between high-tech arrogance and basement-level brilliance. The record is mirrored, the truth is preserved, and the void is waiting. See you in the void, skaters! The ride is only getting started, and the record never forgets a hero with a hammer and a dream. Stay sharp, stay stocky, and never, ever let go of the bumper. Finality is just a manual override away. The end is just the beginning of the next repair. Keep skating, keep fixing, keep holding the line against the darkness. The void is calling, and Flubber Lane is the only one who knows the answer is usually a well-placed kick and a prayer. Episode 2 is closed, but the record is just warming up. The big picture is the galaxy itself, and it's a mess that only a basement kid can clean up. End transmission. Stay tuned for more chaos, more grease, and more Flubber Lane. The void awaits, and so does the next project on the list. Keep your wheels spinning and your wrenches ready. Catch you on the flip side.